If I marry another woman besides you, Gongosu began, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of his words, let me never know peace again in my life. Let poverty, misery, and bad luck become my constant companions. Let the woman I take in your place live in sorrow as long as the union lasts, and let her children be cursed, blind, deaf, dumb, crippled, and mad. Let my home become a house of pain, devoid of joy and music, filled only with perpetual agony. Edidare stepped forward, her face pale but her voice unwavering as she spoke. If I marry another man, she declared, let me become barren and destitute. Let shame cling to me like a shadow, and let death take me in the most agonizing way. Let all my dreams shatter and my life descend into torment. The witch doctor, Obinrinkuku, standing as their only witness, nodded solemnly. Your words are bound, she rasped, her voice filled with a dark finality. But remember, no curse is without its conditions for release. Gongosu, to break this vow, you must lie with a female goat in the market square under the noonday sun before a crowd. Edidare, your bond will break only if you willingly eat a meal prepared by the woman who replaces you. These are the only keys to your freedom. Gongosu and Edidare nodded, believing neither would ever betray the other, for the stakes were too high, the consequences too severe. Gongosu's resolve to make such a vow was forged in the fires of his childhood. His father, a man of great ambition but little wisdom, had 7 wives and 28 children. Gongosu's mother, the 4th wife, spent her life battling jealousy, insults, and deprivation. He grew up watching his siblings tear into each other over scraps of food and favor. The compound was a war zone where bitterness and malice reigned supreme. Gongosu swore never to repeat his father's mistakes. For Edidare, the scars ran even deeper. Her father had married 4 women, but her mother, the first wife, bore the brunt of the family's strife. One fateful night, an argument over inheritance spiraled into violence, and Edidare's mother was beaten to death by the second wife. Edidare, just a girl then, had cradled her mother's lifeless body, the blood staining her hands and soul. That memory never left her. When Gongosu proposed marriage, Edidare's one condition was absolute. No other woman would ever share her place. I can't endure what my mother endured, she told him. If it means going to the devil himself to ensure that, so be it. Gongosu, haunted by his own memories, agreed. Together, they sought out Obinrinkuku, the witch doctor, believing that a curse of such magnitude would safeguard their union. Gongosu and Edidare began their marriage with the fierce determination of 2 people who had seen the worst of love's failures and were resolved to escape them. Their home, built on the outskirts of the village, was modest but filled with hope. Gongosu hunted in the dense forests, providing meat for their table, while Edidare tended a small farm. For years, their life was peaceful, almost idyllic, and they believed their woes had served their purpose. But the shadow of those woes loomed over them like a curse waiting to be triggered. Gongosu would often wake in the middle of the night, sweating and trembling from dreams of himself standing naked in the market square, the crowd laughing as a goat bleated beside him. Edidare, too, found herself haunted. She would feel a bitter taste in her mouth whenever she thought of sharing a meal, a taste that reminded her of betrayal and blood. Despite their love, they could not forget the darkness they had bound themselves to. It began with a whisper, a seed of doubt planted by an old friend of Gongosu's. Abata, a trader who traveled far and wide, visited their home one evening. Over a meal of roasted yam and palm vine, Abata casually remarked, "You have done well for yourself, Gongosu. A strong man like you should have more wives, more children. Why waste all this wealth on just one woman?" Gongosu forced a laugh, brushing the comment aside. But the words stuck in his mind like thorns. He loved Edidare deeply, but he couldn't deny that Abata's words stirred something in him. The expectations of society and the pressure to prove his strength as a man began to gnaw at his resolve. For Edidare, the fracture came in the form of suspicion. She noticed Gongosu lingering longer in the marketplace, his eyes following a young widow named Ifunk, who sold roasted plantains. Edidare's heart clenched with a jealousy she couldn't suppress. One evening, as they lay in bed, she turned to him, her voice sharp with fear and anger. "You swore before the devil himself," she said. "If you think you can break that vow, you'll bring ruin upon us both." Gongosu denied any wrongdoing, but the tension between them grew. One day, while returning from the forest, Gongosu passed Ifang's stall. She smiled at him, her beauty as radiant as the sun. "Hunter," she called out, her voice like honey. "You work too hard. Let me prepare something for you." Gongosu hesitated, but the temptation was strong. Ifang was everything society deemed desirable in a wife: young, fertile, and charming. His resistance crumbled, and he began visiting her in secret. Weeks turned into months, and the visits became more frequent. Gongosu convinced himself that as long as he didn't marry Ifang, he wasn't breaking his vow. But in his heart, he knew he was walking a dangerous path. Edidare, however, was no fool. She noticed the changes in him, the way he avoided her gaze, the way he rushed through meals and spent more time away from home. She confronted him again, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You think I don't know," she hissed. "You've been seeing her. If you take her into this home, Gongosu, you will destroy everything we've built." Gongosu tried to resist, but the pressure was too great. Under the weight of societal expectations and his own desires, he finally married Ifang in secret. The moment their union was consummated, a cold wind swept through the village, and Gongosu's life began to unravel. His hunting trips turned fruitless, and his traps lay empty for days. The livestock he had painstakingly raised began to die one by one from mysterious illnesses. Ifang herself fell gravely ill, her beauty fading rapidly as her body wasted away. The children she bore were cursed as the vow had decreed, blind, crippled, and mad. Edidare, upon learning of the betrayal, was consumed by fury. "You swore," she screamed, her voice echoing in their now empty home. "You swore before the devil. You have cursed us all." Gongosu, now a broken man, begged for forgiveness, but Edidare's rage was unrelenting. She dared him to fulfill the witch doctor's condition, to humiliate himself in the marketplace and break the curse. But Gongosu refused, too proud to face such public shame. Edidare, too, found herself bound by the curse. Her jealousy turned to bitterness, and her once beautiful laughter became sharp and cutting. She couldn't forgive Gongosu, but she also couldn't leave him, for to do so would mean breaking her own vow. As the weeks turned into months, Gongosu and Edidare's lives became a living nightmare. The weight of their woes pressed down on them like an invisible hand, choking the joy from their once happy union. Gongosu's pride, once a source of his strength, now became his greatest weakness. Despite his suffering, he refused to consider the witch doctor's grotesque condition for breaking the vow. He could not bear the thought of lying with a goat in the public market, becoming the object of ridicule for generations to come. Instead, he doubled down on his attempts to salvage his life. "Ifang will recover," he told himself. "This is just a trial." But Ifang's condition worsened daily. Her once bright eyes were now dull, and her body was frail and shrunken. The curses had taken root in her womb. The children she bore cried endlessly, their cries filled with agony. The villagers began to whisper, calling Gongosu a cursed man. Gongosu's hunting remained fruitless, and soon he was unable to feed his family. His once proud stature became hunched under the weight of shame and despair. The respect he had once commanded in the village had turned to pity and scorn. Edidare, meanwhile, seethed with a hatred so profound it consumed her. She had been willing to endure anything to protect her marriage, but Gongosu's betrayal had shattered her trust. She withdrew from him entirely, retreating into the farm during the day and sitting in silence by the fire at night. Yet, she could not leave. The vow bound her to him, and the thought of breaking it filled her with dread. She could not imagine eating a meal prepared by Ifang, the woman who had stolen her husband. Her hatred festered into something darker, a desire for revenge. If Gongosu thought he could live with his betrayal, she would ensure he suffered for it every single day. Late one night, as Edidare sat by the fire, she heard a faint whisper outside their home. It was a voice she hadn't heard in years, her mother's voice, calling her name. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Edidare, the voice said, soft yet filled with sorrow. You know what must be done. Trembling, Edidare stood and followed the voice into the forest. She walked deeper and deeper until she reached the place where they had made their vows before Obinrinkuku. The altar, now overgrown with vines and moss, seemed to pulsate with a dark energy. You seek answers, the witch doctor's voice rasped from the shadows. The curses will tighten their grip, child. But you can still choose how it ends. What can I do? Edidare whispered. Obinrinkuku stepped forward, her face illuminated by the faint moonlight. You can end him, or you can end yourself. Either way, the bond will break. Edidare's blood ran cold. Was this her only option? Kill the man she had once loved, or take her own life to escape the torment? That same night, Gongosu dreamed of the marketplace. He stood in the center, naked and trembling, as villagers jeered and pointed. The goat bleated loudly beside him, and the sun scorched his skin. But this time, something was different. In his dream, Edidare stood at the edge of the crowd, her face a mask of anger and grief. You did this to us, she said, her voice echoing in his mind. You brought this curse upon our heads. Gongosu woke with a start, drenched in sweat. The shadows in the room seemed to move, mocking him, whispering of his failure. He could not escape the knowledge that he had broken the vow and doomed them both. The tension between Gongosu and Edidare reached a breaking point when they finally confronted each other in the dim light of their crumbling home. You have to break the vow, Edidare said, her voice cold and unfeeling. Go to the market, do what must be done, and humiliate myself for the rest of my life. Gongosu spat back. You think that will solve anything? If you won't do it, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, I'll end it myself. Gongosu's eyes widened. He realized then that Edidare was capable of anything, her hatred so consuming that she would rather destroy everything than let him live in defiance of the curse. Edidare began to plot in secret. If Gongosu would not fulfill the witch doctor's condition, she would force his hand. She knew the marketplace was the key, and she began spreading rumors among the villagers. She hinted at a spectacle that would take place in the square, ensuring that a crowd would gather. Gongosu, oblivious to her plans, continued to sink further into despair. He avoided Ifunk's sickbed, unable to face the consequences of his actions. He was a man on the edge, haunted by his dreams and the weight of his failure. On the day Edidare had chosen, she led Gongosu into the marketplace under the pretense of needing supplies. When they arrived, the square was packed with villagers, their faces eager and expectant. Gongosu felt a chill run down his spine as he realized something was wrong. Before he could turn back, Edidare stepped forward and shouted, Today, the curse will be broken. Gongosu froze, his heart pounding as he saw the villagers turn to him, their eyes filled with curiosity and judgment. The marketplace incident left Gongosu humiliated but not broken. As he walked back home, his mind churned with plans. Edidare's public spectacle had made him the laughingstock of the village, but it had also lit a fire of bitterness within him. She thinks she can manipulate me, he thought, fists clenched. But to can play this game. If Gongosu refused to fulfill the witch doctor's condition, there was still another way to break the vow. If Edidare ate food prepared by Ifunk, the curse would be annuls, and he would be free. It was a loophole he could exploit, if only he could find a way to trick her. Gongosu knew Edidare's hatred for Ifunk ran deep, so a direct approach was out of the question. He decided to be subtle. One evening, as Edidare worked in the farm, Gongosu prepared a pot of stew in the kitchen. He had learned to cook passably over the years, but this time, he added something special, a ball of pounded yam and egusi soup prepared earlier that day by Ifunk. As Edidare returned from the farm, weary and hungry, Gongosu greeted her with an unusual sweetness. You've worked hard today, he said, setting the food before her. Let me serve you for once. Edidare eyed him suspiciously. It wasn't like Gongosu to act this way, especially after weeks of hostility. She took a small spoonful of the stew, tasting it cautiously. But something was off. She paused, her senses tingling with an unfamiliar taste. Her instincts kicked in, and she pushed the ball away. Where did this food come from? She demanded, her eyes narrowing. It's from my hands, Gongosu said, feigning innocence. Why would I give you anything else? Edidare didn't believe him. She grabbed the pot, stormed outside, and threw the stew to the ground, her voice shaking with fury. Don't think I don't know what you are trying to do. The failure of his first attempt only deepened the chasm between them. Edidare became even more watchful, refusing to eat anything Gongosu prepared. She began cooking her own meals and avoiding him altogether, her bitterness festering into hatred. Gongosu, meanwhile, grew desperate. He visited Ifunk late one night and explained the situation, asking for her help. She'll never eat anything I prepare, he confessed. But if we find a way to disguise the food, she might not know. Ifunk, though weakened by her illness, agreed. She prepared another meal, infusing it with herbs to mask her signature cooking style. Gongosu decided to offer the meal to Edidare under the guise of hosting a peace offering. Gongosu arranged a small feast and invited Edidare to join him at the table. This fighting is tearing us apart, he said, trying to sound remorseful. Let us eat together and find a way forward. Edidare, though wary, decided to sit. She took a sip of the palm wine Gongosu poured for her, watching him closely. But as she reached for the food, she paused. Something about the aroma triggered her suspicions. Her eyes darted to Gongosu, who avoided her gaze. Who cooked this? She asked, her voice sharp. I did, Gongosu lied, but his face betrayed him. Without another word, Edidare grabbed the dish and hurled it at the wall, the clay pot shattering into pieces. You think I'm a fool? She screamed. I know this is her food. You will never trick me. The failure of his second attempt pushed Gongosu further into despair. He began to lose weight, his once strong frame reduced to a shadow of its former self. The villagers whispered that he was cursed, and even Ifunk began to distance herself from him, fearing the wrath of the vow. Edidare, meanwhile, grew colder and more ruthless. She taunted Gongosu daily, reminding him of his betrayal and the curses he had brought upon their family. Her words were sharp as knives, cutting into whatever pride he had left. You'll never escape this, she told him one evening, her voice dripping with venom. Not unless you do what the witch doctor said. But you're too much of a coward for that, aren't you? Gongosu, now cornered, realized that trickery alone would not work. If he couldn't outwit Edidare, he would have to rely on her own weaknesses. He began to observe her closely, looking for moments when her guard was down. At the same time, he sought out Obinrinkuku again, desperate for guidance. The vow is killing me, he confessed. Is there no other way? The witch doctor only smiled, her eyes gleaming with malice. The curse is alive, Gongosu, she said. It feeds on your suffering. The longer you fight it, the stronger it becomes. If you want freedom, you must be willing to sacrifice everything, even your pride, your dignity, your very soul. As the months passed, the curse began to extend its claws deeper into the family. Ifunk's 3 children, born into a union bound by betrayal, became the first victims. Each child was afflicted with a strange and protracted illness that left the villagers whispering in fear and pity. The eldest, a boy named Aoedun, developed a fever that refused to break, leaving him bedridden for weeks. His once bright eyes turned dull, and his body wasted away as if the life were being drained from him. The second child, a girl named Omodra, began to have seizures that struck without warning, her screams echoing through the night. The youngest, barely a year old, cried endlessly, his tiny body contorting in pain, his cries sounding more like the wails of a tortured soul than a baby. Ifunk herself, already weakened by the curse, could do little but weep over her children. Her beauty, once radiant, was now a shadow of itself, her face etched with grief and exhaustion. Edidare, too, found herself spiraling into despair. The life she had feared, the one filled with bitterness, envy, and unending sorrow, had now become her reality. Depression wrapped around her like a heavy cloak, suffocating her will to fight. Yet, her anger at Gongosu burned hotter with each passing day. She saw him as the architect of their suffering, the man whose betrayal had doomed them all. One evening, as Gongosu sat silently by the fire, his shoulders slumped in defeat, Edidare lashed out. "Do you see what you've done?" she screamed, her voice raw with fury. "Look at those children. Look at Ifunk. Look at me. You have cursed us all, and yet you sit here, too proud to do what must be done." Gongosu flinched but said nothing. "If you are not ashamed to sleep with Ifunk in the shadows," she continued, her voice trembling with rage, "then you should not be ashamed to sleep with a she-goat in the marketplace. Why must I, the wronged, also be the redeemer? Why should I be the one to eat food prepared by that woman while you hide behind your pride?" Her words hit Gongosu like blows, but he refused to respond. Gongosu's pride, though battered, refused to yield. The thought of humiliating himself in such a public and grotesque way was unbearable. He told himself he could find another way to break the curse, though deep down, he knew there was no escape. "I will not do it," he said one night, his voice cold and final. "You think I'm the only one to blame, but you forget that we both swore those vows. If you want the curse to end, eat the food. You call it the easier option, yet you refuse it." Edidare stared at him, her eyes blazing with hatred. "You dare to blame me?" she spat. "You were the one who broke the vow, Gongosu. You are the one who invited this evil into our lives. Do not think I will bear the burden of your sin." The suffering of Ifunk's children only grew worse. Their cries filled the night, a constant reminder of the curse's power. Villagers began avoiding the family, fearful that the misfortune might spread to them. Even the elders, who once respected Gongosu, turned their backs on him. Ifunk, racked with guilt and sorrow, begged Gongosu to do something. "Please," she whispered one night as they sat by the sickbed of their young guest. "If you won't do it for me, do it for them. These are your children, Gongosu. How can you watch them suffer?" But Gongosu's resolve remained unshaken. "The curse is cruel," he said, his voice hollow. "But I cannot bring myself to face such shame." Edidare, though outwardly defiant, began to feel the weight of her own stubbornness. She couldn't escape the nagging thought that perhaps eating Ifunk's food was the simplest way out. Yet, her pride and anger held her back. "What kind of woman would I be to forgive such a betrayal?" she muttered to herself. "If I give in now, what stops him from betraying me again? No, he must be the one to pay." Her days became a torment of conflicting emotions. She would often stand over the fire, staring at her untouched food, her stomach growling with hunger but her resolve unbroken. One fateful evening, as the cries of Ifunk's children echoed through the house, Edidare snapped. She stormed into the room where Gongosu sat in silence, her face twisted with fury and despair. "You will go to the marketplace," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "You will do what the witch doctor commanded, or I will make you regret the day you were born." Gongosu looked up at her, his face pale and weary. "And if I don't?" he asked, his voice a mere whisper. "Then I will find my own way to end this," she said, her eyes glinting with a dangerous determination. "Even if it means bringing this entire house down around us." Ifunk had spent countless nights in torment, watching her children suffer and blaming herself for the calamity that had befallen her family. The cries of her children, the hostile stares of Edidare, and the cold indifference of Gongosu all weighed heavily on her. Yet, it wasn't until she learned about the woes Gongosu and Edidare had made that the full scope of her predicament dawned on her. "How could I have been so blind?" she whispered to herself, tears streaming down her face. Consumed by guilt and desperation, Ifunk sought advice from anyone who would listen. She spoke to old women at the stream, young men in the marketplace, and even strangers passing through the village. But the advice she received was contradictory and confusing. Some told her to leave the family and start afresh. Others suggested she confront Edidare directly or demand Gongosu fulfill the witch doctor's condition. None of it felt right. One day, a kind-hearted woman noticed Ifunk's distress and offered to take her to a man of God known for his wisdom and compassion. At first, Ifunk hesitated. She had little faith in such things, but with her options dwindling, she agreed. The man of God, a soft-spoken elder with piercing eyes, listened intently as Ifunk poured out her heart. She told him everything, the woes, the curses, and the unbearable suffering that had overtaken her family. When she finished, the pastor sat in silence for a moment before speaking. Curses thrive in the soil of hatred and selfishness, he said. The only antidote is love. Love can uproot even the deepest curses and restore what was lost. Love. Ifunk repeated, bewildered. How can I love a woman who hates me? How can I love a man who has brought this misery upon us? The pastor smiled gently. Love is not a feeling, my child, it is a choice. And with love must come restitution. If you wish to save your children and yourself, you must do what is right, even if it costs you everything. What must I do? Ifunk asked, her voice trembling. Endear yourself to Edidare's children, the pastor said. Win their hearts, especially her eldest daughter. Make her your closest ally, and she will help you feed your food to Edidare. Once the curse is broken, leave Edidare and Gongosu to themselves. Be single, for your own safety and that of your children. The pastor's words filled Ifunk with a mixture of hope and dread. She knew what she had to do, but the thought of leaving Gongosu and starting anew terrified her. Still, she resolved to follow the pastor's counsel, believing it was her only chance to save her children. Ifunk began her mission with careful planning. She started by reaching out to Edidare's children, offering small gestures of kindness, a sweet treat here, a story there. The younger children were easy to win over, their innocence making them receptive to her warmth. But Edidare's eldest daughter, Modupe, was a different matter. Fiercely loyal to her mother, Modupe viewed Ifunk with suspicion and disdain. Ifunk knew she would have to earn Modupe's trust before making her a confidant. Ifunk focused her efforts on Modupe, finding ways to connect with her. She began helping Modupe with her chores, offering guidance on tasks like weaving and cooking. She praised Modupe's intelligence and beauty, showing genuine interest in her dreams and aspirations. Slowly but surely, Modupe began to soften. She started seeking Ifunk's advice on personal matters and even confiding in her about her frustrations with her parents. One evening, as they sat together under the moonlight, Modupe said, "You are not as bad as I thought, Ifunk. I can see you care about us." Ifunk seized the moment. "I do care, Modupe," she said earnestly. "Not just for you, but for your mother as well. I want to see this family healed, but I need your help to make it happen." "What kind of help?" Modupe asked, her curiosity piqued. "I need you to help your mother eat a meal I've prepared," Ifunk said. "It will bring peace to this household. Can you trust me?" Modupe hesitated but finally nodded. "If it will help Mama, I'll do it." The next day, Ifunk prepared a meal with great care, infusing it with the love and hope the pastor had spoken of. She handed the food to Modupe, who brought it to her mother under the pretense that she had cooked it herself. At first, Edidare refused, her instincts warning her against deception. But Modupe, her eyes filled with tears, pleaded with her. "Mawa, I made this for you. Please eat it. For me." Edidare, moved by her daughter's sincerity, reluctantly took a bite. As Edidare swallowed the first mouthful, a strange sensation washed over her. The bitterness and anger that had consumed her heart began to fade, replaced by a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Tears streamed down her face as she realized what had happened. The curse was broken. Ifunk, knowing her part was done, packed her belongings and prepared to leave the household. She embraced her children, whispering promises of a better future. "Where will you go?" Modupe asked, her voice filled with concern. "To a place where we can start anew," Ifunk said. "But know this, Modupe, you and your siblings will always be in my prayers." When the curse broke, its effects lifted as though a dark cloud had been torn from the household. The oppressive atmosphere dissolved, and a strange calm settled over the family. Ifunk's children, who had been gravely ill, began to show signs of recovery. Aedun's fever finally broke, and his frail body started regaining strength. Obodra's seizures stopped, and she began laughing and playing again, as if the horrors of the past months had been a bad dream. Even the youngest child, whose cries had once echoed like a lament of doom, now giggled with the innocence of a child untouched by pain. Edidare, though relieved, found herself wrestling with a whirlwind of emotions. The warmth she had felt when the curse lifted brought with it a wave of clarity and guilt. She realized that Ifunk's food had indeed been the key to breaking the curse, and by resisting it for so long, she had allowed her pride and bitterness to prolong the suffering of her family. She sat in silence that night, staring at the empty ball in her hands. Her daughter, Modupe, knelt beside her. "Ma, are you all right?" Modupe asked gently. Edidare nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know how much hate I carried," she said, her voice trembling. "Ifunk, I thought she was my enemy, but she saved us. And now, she's gone." Gongosu, too, felt the weight of his actions. The lifting of the curse brought him no joy, only a deep sense of shame. He had watched Ifunk suffer for his choices, had allowed Edidare to shoulder the burden of their shared vow, and had done nothing to redeem himself. When he heard that Ifunk had left with their children, a pang of regret pierced his heart. He sought Modupe, hoping for answers. "Where has she gone?" he asked, his voice filled with desperation. "She didn't say," Modupe replied, her tone cold. "Only that she needed to start fresh, away from all of this." Gongosu slumped against the wall, burying his face in his hands. "I should have done more," he murmured. "I should have apologized." News of the curse's end spread quickly through the village. While many were relieved that the family's suffering had ceased, others were critical of Gongosu and Edidare. The elders, who had once respected Gongosu for his resolve against polygamy, now saw him as a man who had brought disgrace upon himself and his household. Ifunk was the true victim, one elder remarked. She carried the burden of their sins and saved them all, yet they let her walk away. Others whispered about Edidare's stubbornness, questioning whether her pride had caused more harm than the curse itself. Far from the village, Ifunk and her children began to rebuild their lives. The teachings of the man of God stayed with her, guiding her decisions. She found a small community that welcomed her, where she worked as a seamstress and provided for her children. Though the scars of her past remained, Ifunk found solace in the laughter of her children and the peace of a life free from the shadow of Gongosu and Edidare. One day, as she watched her children play in the fields, a woman from the community approached her. "You have a strong spirit," the woman said, smiling. "Not many could endure what you have and still find the strength to start anew." Ifunk returned the smile, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "Love and forgiveness," she said. "They saved me as much as they saved my children." Back in the village, Edidare and Gongosu lived in a fragile truce. The breaking of the curse had lifted their immediate suffering, but the wounds it left behind were slow to heal. Edidare began to reevaluate her life, her priorities shifting as she sought to rebuild her relationship with her children. Her bitterness toward Gongosu remained, but she resolved not to let it consume her. Gongosu, on the other hand, lived with the burden of his shame. He spent his days trying to make amends, though he knew he could never truly atone for the pain he had caused. The curse that had once bound Gongosu, Edidare, and Ifunk left scars that would never fully fade. Yet, in its breaking, there was a glimmer of hope, a reminder that love, forgiveness, and sacrifice could heal even the deepest wounds. And so, the tale of Gongosu, Edidare, and Ifunk comes to a close, a story of woes, curses, and the power of love and sacrifice to mend what was broken. Though their paths may never cross again, the lessons of their journey remain. Love can heal, forgiveness can set free, and pride can destroy even the strongest bonds. If you've enjoyed this story and want to experience more like it, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment to let us know your thoughts. Also, hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep the stories alive.